The courtroom was quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Pam Bondi sat at the defense table, her fingers tapping lightly on a folder filled with papers. She glanced around the room as people trickled in, reporters scribbling, notes, curious onlookers taking their seats, and Maria Lopez, her client, sitting nervously beside her. Maria's hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white from the tension gripping her body. Pam took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. This wasn't just another case. It felt personal. Maria was an ordinary woman who worked hard to support her family. She had been accused of stealing money from her employer, a big company called Apex Industries. The charges were serious, but Pam knew something that many others didn't. Maria was innocent. Someone else had framed her, and Pam was determined to prove it. At the front of the room, Judge Richard Hargrove entered through a side door. His black robe billowed slightly as he walked to his seat behind the bench. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the courtroom with cold, calculating eyes. Pam had heard rumors about him before, whispers among lawyers about how he always seemed to rule in favor of powerful defendants or companies, but she hadn't paid much attention to them until now. Something about the way he carried himself made her uneasy. The trial began with opening statements. Victor Lang, the attorney, representing Apex Industries, stood up first. He was tall and confident, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit. His voice boomed through the courtroom as he painted Maria as a greedy opportunist who had betrayed her employer's trust. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, pointing dramatically at Maria, "this is a clear-cut case of theft. My client has provided undeniable evidence proving Ms. Lopez's guilt." Maria flinched visibly at the accusation, and Pam placed a reassuring hand on her arm. When it was Pam's turn to speak, she rose slowly, her posture steady and professional. "Your Honor, members of the jury," she began, her voice calm but firm. "What you're about to hear is not a story of greed, but one of manipulation. Maria Lopez is being used as a scapegoat by people who want to protect themselves. I intend to show you the truth." As the day wore on, witnesses were called to testify. First came Sarah Mitchell, a manager at Apex Industries. She described how discrepancies had been found in the company's accounts and claimed that Maria had access to the funds during the time in question. Pam listened carefully, jotting down notes. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she asked pointed questions designed to expose holes in Sarah's testimony. "Ms. Mitchell," Pam said, leaning forward slightly, "you mentioned that Maria had access to the account. Can you tell us exactly how many other employees also had access?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward Victor Lang for guidance. "Well, several people did," she admitted reluctantly. "And yet," Pam continued, raising an eyebrow, "none of those other individuals are currently facing charges. Isn't that interesting?" Victor objected immediately, calling Pam's line of questioning irrelevant, but Judge Hargrove upheld the objection without even hearing Pam's argument. It was the first sign that things might not go smoothly. Pam bit her tongue, forcing herself to stay focused. She couldn't let frustration get the better of her, not yet. Later that afternoon, another witness took the stand, a forensic accountant named Daniel Carter. He presented charts and graphs showing where the missing money had supposedly gone. According to his analysis, all signs pointed directly to Maria. Pam studied the data closely, searching for inconsistencies. There had to be something they were missing. When it was her turn to question Daniel, Pam zeroed in on the details. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone polite but probing, "can you explain why these transactions occurred late at night when most employees would have already left the office?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I can only speculate," he stammered. "Perhaps Ms. Lopez stayed late to cover her tracks. Or perhaps someone else accessed the system remotely," Pam countered smoothly. "Did you check for any remote logins during that time period?" Again, Victor jumped in with an objection, claiming Pam was badgering the witness, and again Judge Hargrove sided with him. Pam clenched her jaw, but nodded respectfully, stepping back to her seat. She could feel the weight of the odds stacking against her, but she refused to give up. By the end of the day, the courtroom emptied, leaving Pam alone with her thoughts. Laura Myers, her colleague and close friend, approached her cautiously. "How's it going?" Laura asked, concern etched on her face. "It's not good," Pam admitted, rubbing her temples. "Hargrove seems hell-bent on making sure we lose this case. Every objection Victor raises gets sustained, no matter how weak it is." Laura frowned. "That doesn't sound right. Have you noticed anything unusual about him before?" Pam shook her head. "Not really. I mean, I've heard rumors, but nothing concrete." "Still?" She trailed off, lost in thought. Laura placed a reassuring hand on Pam's shoulder. "We'll figure it out. We always do." For the rest of the evening, Pam pored over every piece of evidence they had gathered so far. She replayed witness testimonies in her mind, searching for patterns or clues she might have missed. As she worked, a nagging feeling grew stronger, the sense that something bigger was at play here. Why was Judge Hargrove so eager to shut her down? What was he hiding? Finally, exhausted but unwilling to call it quits, Pam leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't back down. Not when so much was at stake. For Maria's sake, and for the sake of justice itself, she would fight tooth and nail to uncover the truth. And if that meant confronting Judge Hargrove the morning after Pam Bondi's explosive confrontation with Judge Richard Hargrove, the city buzzed with energy. News outlets led their broadcasts with headlines about the scandal, and social media was ablaze with reactions. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse holding signs that read "Justice over corruption" and "Stand with Maria." Pam arrived early, her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. Reporters lined the steps of the courthouse, shouting questions as she made her way inside. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Security had been tightened and court officials scurried around like ants, clearly unsure of how to handle the fallout from the previous day's events. Laura Myers joined Pam in the hallway, clutching a stack of printed materials. "You're everywhere," Laura said, gesturing to her phone. "Every channel is talking about what you did." Pam nodded, though she looked weary. "It's not about me," she replied firmly. "It's about exposing the truth. If this gets people thinking about accountability, then it's worth it." Laura smiled faintly. "Still, you've become a symbol for a lot of people. Even my mom called me this morning asking if I knew you personally." Pam chuckled softly but didn't respond. She was too focused on what lay ahead. A new judge had been assigned to take over the case, a no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Carter, known for her fairness and sharp legal mind. While this was a positive development, Pam knew the fight wasn't over yet. Victor Lang and Apex Industries would still do everything in their power to protect themselves. When the courtroom doors opened, the room was packed. Spectators filled every seat, and reporters jostled for space near the front. Judge Evelyn Carter entered briskly, her presence commanding immediate silence. She took her seat and surveyed the room with a stern gaze. "This court will now proceed with order," she announced, her voice firm. "I expect professionalism from all parties involved." Victor Lang stood up first, attempting to regain control of the narrative. He argued that Pam's accusations against Hargrove were irrelevant to the case and should be stricken from the record. "Your Honor," he said, his tone polished but strained, "the defense has resorted to baseless attacks in an effort to distract from the overwhelming evidence against Ms. Lopez." Pam rose calmly, meeting the new judge's eyes. "Your Honor, the evidence against my client is far from overwhelming. In fact, much of it has been manipulated or fabricated. And as for Judge Hargrove's conduct, it speaks directly to the integrity of these proceedings. To ignore it would be a disservice to justice itself." Judge Carter listened carefully before responding. "Mr. Lang, while I understand your concerns, Ms. Bondi raises valid points regarding potential bias. Any appearance of impropriety undermines public trust in our system. That said, we must focus on the facts of this case moving forward." With that, the trial resumed. Pam called her next witness, a cybersecurity expert named Emily Dawson. Emily, had analyzed the digital trail left by the alleged theft and discovered critical flaws in the prosecution's argument. Taking the stand, she explained how Maria's login credentials could have easily been compromised by someone else. Based on my findings, Emily testified, it's entirely possible that another user accessed the account remotely. The system logs show inconsistencies that suggest foul play, but they were overlooked during the initial investigation. Victor Lang attempted to discredit Emily's testimony, questioning her methods and qualifications, but Pam skillfully countered each objection, reinforcing Emily's credibility. By the time cross-examination ended, the jury seemed visibly swayed. As the day wore on, tensions between Pam and Victor grew palpable. Victor accused Pam of orchestrating a media circus, while Pam shot back that transparency was essential when corruption was at play. Judge Carter repeatedly reminded both attorneys to maintain decorum, but the underlying hostility remained. During a recess, Pam stepped outside for fresh air. She found herself surrounded by reporters eager for quotes, but she politely declined to comment. Instead, she leaned against the railing, watching the protesters below. Many held pictures of Maria and chanted slogans demanding justice. It was surreal to see so many people rallying behind her cause. Maria approached cautiously, her face pale but hopeful. "Is it working?" she asked quietly. "Are they listening?" Pam turned to her, offering a small smile. "They're starting, too. But we can't let our guard down. We still have work to do." Back inside the courtroom, the afternoon session began with closing arguments. Victor Lang went first, delivering a passionate speech designed to paint Maria as guilty beyond doubt. He emphasized the financial discrepancies and claimed that Pam's efforts to discredit the prosecution amounted to desperation. When it was Pam's turn, she stood tall, her voice steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case isn't just about numbers or bank accounts. It's about truth versus manipulation. My client, Maria Lopez, is an innocent woman, caught in a web of deceit spun by those who value profit over people." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Ask yourselves, why has the prosecution relied so heavily on circumstantial evidence? Why have key witnesses contradicted themselves under scrutiny? And why did Judge Hargrove, before being exposed, go out of his way to obstruct justice?" Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "Maria deserves better than assumptions and innuendos. She deserves fairness, and today you have the power to give her that. You have the power to say that corruption will not prevail, that honesty matters, and that everyone, rich or poor, is equal under the law." The courtroom fell silent as Pam returned to her seat. Maria reached out and squeezed her hand, tears streaming down her face. Even some jurors wiped their eyes, visibly moved by Pam's words. After closing arguments concluded, Judge Carter instructed the jury to begin deliberations. As they filed out of the room, Pam felt a mix of hope and anxiety. The evidence was strong, but she knew anything could happen behind closed doors. Outside the courthouse, the crowd waited anxiously for news. Reporters shouted updates into their microphones, and supporters held vigil, lighting candles in solidarity with Maria. Pam stayed close to her client, offering quiet reassurance. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we've already won. In one way. People are paying attention now. They're seeing the cracks in the system and demanding change." Hours passed and the tension mounted. Finally, late in the evening, the jury returned with their verdict. As everyone re-entered the courtroom, the air felt electric. Judge Carter called for silence, then turned to the foreman. "How do you find the defendant, Maria Lopez?" she asked. The foreman stood, his voice steady. "We find the defendant not guilty." A wave of cheers erupted in the courtroom. Maria broke down in tears, hugging Pam tightly. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment, and supporters outside cheered wildly. For the first time in weeks, relief washed over Pam's face. Justice had prevailed, for Maria at least. But as the celebration continued, Pam couldn't shake the larger implications of what had happened. Exposing Judge Hargrove's corruption had ignited a national conversation about accountability in the judicial system. Calls for investigations into other judges and officials flooded the airwaves. Pam realized that her actions had sparked something bigger than she'd anticipated, a movement for reform. Later that night, exhausted but fulfilled, Pam sat alone in her office. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages of gratitude and admiration. Yet, amid the accolades, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. The road ahead would be long and the fight for systemic change wouldn't end here. But for now, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace, knowing she had done everything she could to stand up for what was right. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she let herself rest. The morning dawned gray and dreary, the rain from the night before still lingering in the air. Pam Bondi woke up earlier than usual, her mind already racing with the events ahead. Today was the day she would confront Judge Richard Hargrove directly, exposing his corruption in front of everyone. She knew it was a risky move, perhaps the riskiest of her career, but she also knew it was necessary. Justice demanded boldness, and Pam was determined to deliver it. After dressing in her sharpest suit, a navy blue number that exuded confidence, Pam grabbed her briefcase and headed to the courthouse. The streets were slick with rain, and the sky remained overcast, casting a somber mood over the city. When she arrived, the courtroom was already buzzing with activity. Reporters had set up cameras near the back, eager to capture any dramatic moments. Maria Lopez sat quietly beside Pam, her hands trembling slightly. Pam gave her a reassuring smile, though inside her own nerves were taut as a wire. Laura Myers joined them shortly after, carrying a folder filled with the evidence they'd gathered about Hargrove. "You ready for this?" Laura whispered as they took their seats. "As ready as I'll ever be," Pam replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing within her. When Judge Hargrove entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. He strode to his bench with an air of authority, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. Pam watched him closely, noting the slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. It only strengthened her resolve. This man thought he could manipulate the system without consequences, but today he would learn otherwise. The trial resumed with Victor Lang calling another witness to the stand, a former IT technician named Alan Brooks. Alan testified that Maria's login credentials had been used to access the company's financial system during the time the alleged theft occurred. According to him, the timestamps matched perfectly with Maria's work schedule. Victor seized on this testimony, using it to further paint Maria as guilty. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he declared, pacing dramatically in front of the courtroom, "the evidence is clear. Ms. Lopez not only had motive but also opportunity. Her actions speak for themselves." Pam listened intently, jotting down notes as Alan spoke. When it was her turn to cross-examine, she approached the stand calmly. "Mr. Brooks," she began, her tone polite yet probing, "you mentioned that Maria's login credentials were used. Can you confirm whether anyone else might have accessed her account remotely?" Alan hesitated, glancing toward Victor for guidance. I suppose it's possible, but we didn't find any signs of remote access. So you're saying there's no definitive proof that Maria herself logged in, correct?" Pam pressed. Before Alan could answer, Victor objected, claiming Pam was leading the witness. True to form, Judge Hargrove sustained the objection without hesitation. Pam returned to her seat, frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. Every ruling against her felt like another brick in the wall blocking justice. But Pam wasn't done yet. As the next recess approached, she signaled to Laura, who handed her the folder containing the damning evidence about Hargrove. Taking a deep breath, Pam stood up just as the judge prepared to dismiss the court for a short break. "Your Honor," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. "Before we adjourn, I have a matter of utmost importance to address." Judge Hargrove looked up sharply, his eyes narrowing. "Ms. Bondi, unless this pertains directly to the case, I suggest we handle it later." "Oh, it pertains directly to the case, Your Honor," Pam replied, her tone firm. "In fact, it pertains to you." A hush fell over the courtroom. All eyes turned to Pam as she walked slowly toward the center of the room, holding up a printed copy of the database entry showing Hargrove's ownership of Apex Industries stock. "Your Honor," I have uncovered evidence revealing that you hold shares in the very company accusing my client of embezzlement. This constitutes a clear conflict of interest, and I move to have you recused from this case immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victor Lang shot to his feet, sputtering objections, but Pam ignored him, keeping her focus on the judge. Judge Hargrove's face turned pale, his composure cracking for the first time. "This is outrageous," he snapped, slamming his gavel down. "Ms. Bondi, how dare you accuse me of impropriety in my own courtroom?" "It's not an accusation, Your Honor," Pam countered smoothly, her voice rising above the growing chaos. "It's a fact. And if you refuse to step down voluntarily, I will ensure the entire world knows the truth." With that, she turned to the reporters seated in the gallery, holding up the document for everyone to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet your honorable judge, a man whose personal investments align suspiciously with the interests of one of the most powerful corporations in this state." The room erupted into pandemonium. Cameras flashed as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Spectators whispered among themselves, their shock evident. Even the jurors exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by the revelation. Victor Lang tried to intervene, shouting over the noise. "Objection, Your Honor. This is completely inappropriate and irrelevant." But Pam wasn't finished. She pulled out additional documents, transcripts of past cases where Hargrove had ruled in favor of wealthy defendants or corporations, and began distributing copies to the jury, opposing counsel, and members of the press. "Take a look at these rulings," she urged, her voice ringing with authority. "They speak for themselves. Judge Hargrove has a history of bias, and today we've exposed the reason why." Judge Hargrove's face flushed red with anger. "Silence!" he roared, banging his gavel repeatedly. "I will not tolerate such disrespect in my courtroom." But Pam stood her ground undeterred. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the people deserve to know the truth. If you truly believe in fairness and impartiality, then you'll step aside and let someone else preside over this case." For a moment, the judge seemed frozen, unsure of how to respond. The weight of the situation bore down on him visibly. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and stormed out of the courtroom, leaving everyone stunned. As the commotion died down, Pam returned to her seat, her heart pounding. Maria reached out and grasped her hand, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," Maria whispered hoarsely. "Thank you for standing up for me." Pam squeezed her hand gently, offering a small, weary smile. "We're not done yet," she said softly, "but we're closer than we were yesterday." Outside the courtroom, news of the confrontation spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with hashtags like "Justice for Maria" and "Our Corrupt Judge" as videos of Pam's speech went viral. People across the country tuned in, outraged by the allegations against Hargrove and inspired by Pam's courage. Later that evening, Pam met with Laura at a nearby cafe to debrief. Both women were exhausted but exhilarated by what had transpired. "Do you realize what you've done?" Laura asked, shaking her head in amazement. "You've sparked a national conversation about judicial integrity." Pam sighed, running, a hand through her hair. "I just hope it's enough to make a difference. For Maria, and for everyone else who's ever been failed by the system." Laura nodded thoughtfully. "It will. Trust me, this isn't the kind of story that fades away quietly. Tomorrow the whole world will be watching." As they parted ways, Pam couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and apprehension. She had taken a monumental step toward justice, but the fight was far from over. Still, as she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. No matter what happened next, she had stayed true to her principles, and that was something no one could take away from her. The days following the trial were a whirlwind for Pam Bondi. News of her victory and the exposure of Judge Richard Hargrove's corruption spread like wildfire across the country. Interviews poured in from every direction. Morning talk shows, evening news segments, and even national podcasts wanted to hear her story. Pam accepted a few invitations, not for fame or recognition, but because she saw an opportunity to shine a light on the systemic issues plaguing the justice system. In one interview, sitting across from a well-known television host, Pam spoke, with calm determination. "This isn't just about Maria Lopez," she explained. "It's about ensuring that everyone, no matter their background or circumstances, is treated fairly under the law. What happened in that courtroom shouldn't be extraordinary. It should be the norm." Her words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking debates about judicial ethics and accountability. Lawmakers began discussing potential reforms, while watchdog groups launched investigations into other judges and officials suspected of misconduct. For the first time in years, there was real momentum behind efforts to clean up the legal system. Back home, Pam tried to settle into a sense of normalcy. She visited Maria and her family, who were overwhelmed with gratitude. Maria's husband, Carlos, shook Pam's hand firmly, tears in his eyes. "You saved us," he said simply. "We'll never forget what you've done." Maria hugged Pam tightly, her voice trembling. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did." Pam smiled softly, though her mind was already turning to the bigger picture. "I didn't do this alone," she replied. "People stood up and demanded justice, not just for you, but for everyone who feels powerless against the system. That's what made the difference." Despite the outpouring of support, Pam knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Powerful figures within the legal community pushed back against the calls for reform, dismissing them as overreactions or attempts to undermine authority. Some accused Pam of grandstanding, claiming she had used the case to boost her own profile. But Pam remained unfazed, knowing that criticism came with the territory when challenging entrenched power structures. One afternoon, Laura Myers joined Pam at her office carrying coffee and a stack of papers. "Have you seen this?" Laura asked, holding up a newspaper headline. It read, "Calls grow for nationwide judicial review amid Florida scandal." Pam skimmed the article, nodding thoughtfully. "It's a start," she said, "but changing the system won't happen overnight. We need more than headlines. We need action." Laura grinned mischievously. "Well, I have an idea. Remember how everyone keeps suggesting you run for office? Maybe it's time to think about it seriously." Pam laughed, shaking her head. "Politics, no thanks. I'd rather fight battles in the courtroom than deal with all that nonsense." "Maybe," Laura countered. "But imagine the impact you could have if you had a platform. You could push for real change from the inside." The thought lingered in Pam's mind, though she dismissed it for now. Her focus remained on helping others navigate the legal system, especially those without resources or connections. She began taking on more pro bono cases, working tirelessly to ensure that justice wasn't reserved only for the wealthy or influential. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Pam's actions became clearer. Investigations into Judge Deere Hargrove revealed not only his financial ties to Apex Industries, but also evidence of bribes and kickbacks involving other high-profile cases. He resigned quietly, disappearing from public life, though whispers of his disgrace followed him wherever he went. Victor Lang, meanwhile, faced scrutiny for his role in the trial. Several former clients came forward, alleging unethical behavior during their own cases. Though nothing stuck legally, his reputation suffered irreparable damage. Apex Industries, too, found itself under intense pressure. Shareholders demanded answers, and internal audits uncovered widespread misconduct. The company implemented sweeping changes to avoid further scandal, but its once spotless image was tarnished forever. Through it all, Pam stayed humble, refusing to let success go to her head. She continued her work, mentoring young lawyers and advocating for policies that promoted transparency and fairness in the courts. Her courage inspired countless others to speak out against injustice, creating a ripple effect far beyond what she'd imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Pam took a rare moment to reflect. Sitting on her porch with a cup of tea, she watched the world slow down around her. The air smelled faintly of blooming flowers, and the distant hum of traffic provided a comforting backdrop. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Laura. "Another judge just got caught red-handed. Looks like your little stunt has started a revolution." Pam chuckled, typing. Back a quick reply. "Not my doing, just people waking up." She set the phone aside and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But progress had been made. And sometimes that was enough. Days later, Pam received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, the penmanship shaky but sincere. Inside, Maria thanked her again, sharing updates about her family. They were rebuilding their lives, finding joy in small moments after months of fear and uncertainty. Enclosed with the letter was a photograph of Maria, Carlos, and their 2 children, smiling brightly against a backdrop of blue skies. Pam pinned the photo to her bulletin board, next to notes from other clients and reminders of ongoing cases. To her, it represented hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, justice could prevail if someone was willing to stand up and fight for it. As she prepared for another day in court, Pam reminded herself why she chose this path in the first place. It wasn't for glory or recognition. It was for people like Maria, people who needed someone to believe in them when the odds seemed insurmountable, people who deserved a fair shot, regardless of wealth or status. Walking into the courthouse that morning, Pam felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead would test her resolve, but she was ready. Justice, she knew, was worth fighting for, not just today, but every day. And as long as there were battles left to win, she would keep standing firm, one case at a time. The next morning, Pam arrived at the courthouse early. The streets were still quiet and the air carried a slight chill that hinted at rain later in the day. She sipped her coffee as she walked through the heavy wooden doors of the building, her mind racing with thoughts about the trial. Yesterday had been tough. Too many setbacks, too many rulings that didn't sit right with her. But Pam wasn't one to give up easily. If anything, the challenges only fueled her determination. Inside the courtroom, Laura was already waiting for her, sitting on a bench near the entrance. When she saw Pam approach, she stood up quickly, clutching a folder in her hands. "I've got something you need to see," Laura said, her voice low but urgent. Pam raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Laura glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then opened the folder. Inside were printouts of court documents, transcripts, rulings, and summaries of previous cases overseen by Judge Richard Hargrove. "I stayed up late last night digging into his record," Laura explained. "And guess what I found? A pattern." Pam leaned closer, scanning the pages. At first glance, they looked like standard legal paperwork, but as she read further, a disturbing trend emerged. In nearly every case involving wealthy defendants or large corporations, Hargrove had ruled in their favor, even when the evidence seemed stacked against them. It was subtle, almost imperceptible unless you were looking for it, but the signs were there. "This can't be a coincidence," Pam murmured, her heart sinking. "He's biased." Laura nodded grimly. "Exactly. And get this. There are whispers online about him being involved in some shady dealings outside the courtroom. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise eyebrows." Pam felt a surge of anger mixed with frustration. This wasn't just about Maria anymore. It was about exposing a system that allowed someone like Hargrove to abuse his power. Still, she knew she couldn't act rashly. She needed proof, something undeniable that would force people to pay attention. "Okay," Pam said finally, closing the folder. "We keep digging. There has to be more we can find. Something he doesn't want anyone to know." As the day's proceedings began, Pam tried to focus on the task at hand. Another witness took the stand, a former co-worker of Maria's named Kevin Walsh. He testified that Maria had often complained about feeling overworked and underappreciated at Apex Industries. According to Kevin, she had once joked about taking the money and running if given the chance. Victor Lang seized on this statement, using it to paint Maria as someone who harbored resentment toward her employer. "Clearly," Victor declared during his cross-examination, "Ms. Lopez had motive. Her dissatisfaction made her a prime candidate for theft." Pam listened intently, her jaw tightening. When it was her turn to question Kevin, she approached the stand with a calm demeanor. "Mr. Walsh," she began, "you mentioned that Maria joked about taking the money. Can you tell us when exactly this happened?" Kevin hesitated, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I think it was maybe 6 months ago." And did she say anything else? Pam pressed gently. Did she elaborate on how she planned to steal the money, or even suggest she actually intended to do so? Kevin shook his head. No, not really, it was just a joke. So, let me clarify, Pam said, turning to face the jury. Maria made a flippant comment half a year ago, which you now interpret as evidence of criminal intent. Is that correct? Before Kevin could respond, Victor objected, calling Pam's question argumentative. Once again, Judge Hargrove sustained the objection without hesitation. Pam returned to her seat, seething silently. Each ruling felt like another brick in the wall blocking her path to justice. During a recess later that afternoon, Pam stepped outside for some fresh air. The sky was gray now, clouds gathering overhead. She leaned against the courthouse railing, staring out at the street below. Laura joined her moments later, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Laura remarked, handing Pam one of the cups. I feel like I am, Pam admitted with a sigh. Every time I try to push back, Hargrove shuts me down. It's like he's determined to make sure we lose. Laura frowned. Do you think he knows something we don't? Maybe he's connected to Apex Industries somehow. Pam froze, the thought hitting her like a lightning bolt. That's it, she whispered, her eyes widening. What if he is? What if he has a personal stake in this case? Without wasting another second, Pam pulled out her phone and started searching for information about Hargrove's financial holdings. Within minutes, she stumbled upon a public database listing assets owned by judges and other public officials. Scrolling through the entries, her heart skipped a beat. There it was, clear as day. Judge Richard Hargrove held shares in Apex Industries. Oh my God, Pam breathed, showing the screen to Laura. He owns stock in the company accusing Maria. That's why he's bending over backward to protect them. Laura's mouth dropped open. This is huge. We can use this to get him disqualified from the case. But Pam hesitated, her mind racing. Disqualifying Hargrove was one thing, but exposing his corruption publicly could have far greater consequences. If handled correctly, this could become a turning point, not just for Maria's case, but for the entire judicial system. We need to be smart about this, Pam said after a moment. If we file a motion to recuse him quietly, it might get buried. But if we call him out in open court, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Laura nodded slowly, understanding dawning on her face. You want to confront him directly? Yes, Pam replied firmly. In front of everyone, let the whole world see what kind of man he really is. That evening, Pam worked tirelessly to prepare her strategy. She drafted a motion requesting Hargrove's removal based on conflict of interest, citing his ownership of Apex Industries stock as evidence. But she also gathered additional materials, copies of the database entry, screenshots of his past rulings, and notes highlighting the patterns of bias uncovered by Laura. By midnight, everything was ready. Pam sat back in her chair, exhausted, but resolute. Tomorrow she would step into that courtroom knowing exactly what she had to do. No matter the risks, no matter the backlash, she was prepared to fight for the truth, for Maria, for justice, and for everyone who believed the system should work fairly for all. As she packed up her things and headed home, rain began to fall, softly outside, tapping against the windows. Pam stared out at the darkened streets, her resolve stronger than ever. The storm ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to weather it.